These are the lecture notes for Chapter 40 on hormones and endocrine systems. And of course, we'll be focusing more on human endocrine system. The sections that we'll cover are animal hormones, and mostly we'll cover human hormones. The hypothalamus and pituitary gland, their relationship and how they control certain functions through hormones. And then the last section is on other endocrine glands and hormones. So an endocrine system is largely composed of glands that coordinate body activities through the secretion of hormones. So one example of that is insulin. Insulin is a hormone secreted by the pancreas whenever your blood glucose levels are high, and insulin helps to lower the blood glucose levels primarily through the actions of the liver, your liver cells. But there are many hormones, and they are carried through the bloodstream to their target cells. If a gland is called an exocrine gland, then it secretes its products into a duct and onto a surface. So think about sweat glands. There are ducts that pass through your skin to the surface of your skin that carry sweat to the surface of your skin. Oil glands, or they're called sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands or oil glands also take their sebum or oil to the surface of your skin through a duct. There are glands secreted by the pancreas, not insulin. Insulin is a hormone, but there are enzymes secreted by the pancreas, and they are digestive enzymes, and they're released into a duct that takes those enzymes to the surface of the inside of your small intestine. So it's not always the surface of your skin, but the big thing is exocrine glands release their secretions through a duct onto some surface, whereas endocrine glands release their secretions, which are hormones, directly into the blood. So their secretions travel through the bloodstream to a target. So what you're seeing here is the pancreas is producing insulin, and that insulin is going through the bloodstream to the liver, and it's going to trigger those liver cells by when the insulin binds to receptors on the surface of those liver cells. The liver cells will remove the glucose from your blood and store it as glycogen. So that's just one example. Now, this is a very important page, and I'm going to blow it up a little bit because it shows you, because the endocrine system is not always as well known, is not the most well studied of the body systems, and a lot of people don't know as much about it. So make sure that you know the main components of the endocrine system. In the brain, we have the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, what the hypothalamus does, it's right here. And then this is the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus releases hormones that influence the hormones that are released from the pituitary. So the hormones released by the hypothalamus are called releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. So they would cause the pituitary gland to release or inhibit the release of its hormones. Now, the pituitary gland is divided into the posterior pituitary, which is on the back side, and the anterior pituitary on the front side. The posterior pituitary releases ADH, which controls water balance in the kidneys, and oxytocin, which stimulates labor contractions and mammary gland secretions of milk. And then the anterior pituitary has several hormones. It has thyroid stimulating hormone. ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then there is FSH and LH, which regulate the menstrual cycle in women. And they also are released in men. And so they will control the production of eggs and sperm and sex hormones. And then there's prolactin, which stimulates milk production Oxytocin stimulates the letdown of the milk that's already produced, but prolactin stimulates milk production. And then there is growth hormone that controls growth. Thyroid, the thyroid gland produces the thyroid hormones T3 and T4 that increase our metabolism. And then the thyroid gland also produces calcitonin, which lowers blood calcium levels when blood calcium levels are too high. The adrenal gland, which sits on top of each kidney, has an outer layer called the adrenal cortex, which produces cortisol and aldosterone and sex hormones. Like, for example, this is a man, and so he already produces testosterone in the testes, but he will produce estrogen in the adrenal cortex. And then the inside of the adrenal gland, called the adrenal medulla, produces epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are like adrenaline. We use those hormones when we're in a fight or flight situation or an emergency situation. They raise our heart rate and our breathing rate, and they cause our blood sugar to raise, so we're getting more sugar to our cells, that kind of thing. The pineal gland is in the brain, and it produces melatonin for sleep. And the parathyroid glands are on the back side, the posterior side of the thyroid gland. There are 4 of them, and they produce PTH, or parathyroid hormone, which raises blood calcium levels. Then we have the thymus, which produces thymosins that regulate the production of T cells or T lymphocytes, which are white blood cells that are part of our immune system. We have the pancreas, which produces digestive enzymes, but for the endocrine system, it produces insulin and glucagon. Insulin will lower blood sugar levels, and glucagon will raise blood sugar levels. And then, even though the gonads are really a part of the reproductive system, they overlap. Because they produce and release hormones, they're also a part of our endocrine system. So the testes in men produce testosterone, and ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. So this is really an important slide. It's slide number 5. It's important for you to learn. It will cover a lot of what is covered in this chapter. It's like a summary of this chapter. Okay, this page just talks about the metamorphosis is controlled by hormones. Hormones are chemical signals. Each hormone has a target cell, and that cell has a receptor, and the hormone will bind to that receptor and cause its effects. The target cell will respond. Now, there's an example here called androgen insensitivity. Androgens are your like testosterone, okay? So they're your male sex hormones. So if you have an individual that has X and Y sex chromosomes, that means the chromosomally, biologically, they are male, but their body cells don't have receptors for testosterone, so they can make all the testosterone. They can make tons of testosterone, but until that testosterone binds to its receptors, it doesn't do anything. So the person, instead of developing into biologically a male, the person develops into a normal female, having all the female reproductive organs, and that even a doctor can't tell, or you can't even tell by doing like an MRI scan of their reproductive organs, that this is a normal female in all ways that you would consider a person to be a female, but their chromosomes say that they're male, and it's because they have androgen insensitivity. They produce testosterone, but it doesn't cause any effects because it doesn't bind to the receptor that it's supposed to bind to. Now, pheromones we mostly hear about with insects and other animals, but pheromones are produced by humans. And there are 2 examples I can give you. One is this one. Women living in the same household tend to have synchronized menstrual cycles due to pheromones released by a menstruating woman affecting other women's menstrual cycles. So they tend to all be on their period at the same time. This happens a lot in dorm situations and apartment living, in families where you have many women who are all menstruating. Over time, they will all be menstruating at the same time. So the other pheromone example has to do with menstruation, but has to do with men. Men produce a pheromone that will affect women. So if they have, like a man has a girlfriend or something, his pheromones can actually ease or make her premenstrual syndrome or premenstrual tension will be less if she is exposed to his pheromones, which just would happen by, being close to him. Okay, and on this slide number 8, it's just showing you how the hormone is released through the blood, and this is a capillary, it is the smallest blood vessel that is releasing this hormone, and this hormone is only going to bind to the receptor that it fits into. So these receptors with the little V shape, obviously this hormone won't match up with those receptors. But on its target cell, it's going to have a shape, and it's going to fit into that receptor, kind of like a puzzle piece. There are 2 types of hormones that we're going to learn. One is peptide hormones, and the other is steroid hormones. For the peptide hormones, remember what peptides are. First of all, a peptide is a long chain of amino acids. So a protein is also defined as a long chain of amino acids, but proteins are actually, they're just larger. Proteins they're large peptides or polypeptides that have undergone shape changes. They have a very complex shape. But basically, peptides are made of amino acids. I'm sorry, I had an interruption. So just to make sure you understand, peptides, proteins, glycoproteins, all are chains of amino acids. And then there's modified amino acids. So peptide hormones basically are going to consist of amino acids. Now, most peptide hormones bind to a receptor on the plasma membrane of the host cell. So the hormone itself doesn't go inside of the cell. It just binds to a receptor on the outside of the cell. And we call that hormone the first messenger. And then it will cause the release of cyclic AMP, adenosine monophosphate. So that will serve as the second messenger. And then there'll be a cascade of reactions that happens after that. Okay, so this shows you, so you have your peptide hormone that came from the blood to its target, and it will bind to the receptor on the plasma membrane of its target. And so we call this hormone is epinephrine, which is, we used to call it adrenaline. So if you heard about someone who has to carry an EpiPen, that's what they're carrying, is epinephrine. Anyway, when that epinephrine, which is the first messenger, binds to the receptor, then you have a cascade of things that happens, chemical reactions that happen. But the first messenger is the hormone itself, which is epinephrine. And then the binding of that epinephrine leads to activation of an enzyme that changes ATP to cyclic AMP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. That is converted to cyclic AMP, which is our second messenger, and then that will activate an enzyme cascade. And in this case, it causes the breakdown of glycogen into glucose, and glucose enters the blood. It raises the blood sugar level or blood glucose levels. Now, the other type of hormones, we have peptide hormones, and then we have steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are all derived from cholesterol. They all start out as cholesterol, which is a lipid, and then they're converted into the particular hormone, like testosterone. So steroid hormones will enter the cell, where peptide hormones do not enter the cell. Steroid hormones enter the cell by moving through the plasma membrane because they are steroids, so they can easily move directly through the plasma membrane phospholipid bilayer. So they don't bind to a receptor protein on the surface. They enter the cell, and then in the nucleus, the steroid hormone will bind to a receptor, and the hormone receptor complex will bind with DNA and activate genes. So that steroid hormones act more slowly than peptide hormones, but their effects last longer. So this is slide number 11. We'll stop here, and I'll start the next recording with slide 12.